Week 5 focused on answering the question, what is electricity and how do we assess the sustainability of electricity alternatives? During Week 5, you explored the answers to these questions related to the electricity sector. What is electricity and how does it work? How do electricity profiles differ from region to region? What is the electricity grid and how does it work? What are some advantages and disadvantages to the U.S. electricity grid? Which sustainability indicators should we use to evaluate the sustainability of electricity options? And how does electricity interact with the other main energy uses, transportation and heating? We discussed this last question as part of the Week 5 intro video. Electricity is the flow of electrical power or charge. Electricity is the movement of electrons between atoms. You can see the electrons traveling in the outer portion of an atom in this picture. Electricity travels in closed loops or circuits. It must have a complete path before the electrons can move. If you shut off a light switch, you open the circuit, cutting off the flow of electricity. Electric generators use moving magnets and copper wire together to convert kinetic energy, the energy of motion, into electrical energy. But they must have a primary energy source to be able to generate the kinetic energy needed to move the magnets. The electricity grid is a complex system made up of generators, transformers, transmission and distribution wires, substations, and end users. The electricity produced by a generator travels along cables to a transformer, which changes electricity from low voltage to high voltage. Electricity can be moved long distances more efficiently using high voltage. Transmission lines are used to carry the electricity to a substation. Substations have transformers that change the high voltage electricity into lower voltage electricity. From the substation, distribution lines carry the electricity to homes, offices, and factories, which require low voltage electricity. Throughout each step of the electricity grid, energy is lost along the way, usually as heat. So you start with a certain number of BTUs of primary energy, say from a bunch of coal, but you lose 10 to 60% of the energy content of that primary energy source just in the conversion process from primary energy to electricity. Much of this is thermodynamically necessary waste heat as part of a steam or gas cycle. But there are some power plants that still have the potential to improve their efficiency. Then, kilowatt hours are lost along the way as electricity voltage steps up and down along the transmission and distribution systems. About 7% of total losses are from transmission and distribution. About 5% of total losses are from parasitics, meaning electrical loads that are necessary to keep the grid operating. Computers, sensors, mechanisms for cleaning out pollutants in power plants, etc. So by the time you get to the end user, there is only a small percentage of what you started with. This is one reason distributed generation options are so attractive. You reduce losses from the steam cycle, transmission, and distribution. Now this figure here shows losses in BTUs and in kilowatt hours. They're both just energy units, but this is to show the distinction between primary energy that goes into the power cycle in the form of BTUs. That's usually how we talk about primary energy. And then the electricity that comes out as secondary energy, which we usually measure in kilowatt hours. This map shows the U.S. electricity grid as being actually comprised of three distinct grids: the Eastern Interconnection, Western Interconnection, and Texas. It also allows you to view all of the major generators currently operating to provide power to the grid. However, the U.S. electricity grid isn't really the U.S. electricity grid. It's connected to the North American electricity grid as well. Most electricity in homes is used for appliances, lighting, and gadgets like your iPods, smartphones, tablets, and computers. A lot is also used for air conditioning, water heating, refrigeration, and space heating. The three major components of the electricity grid are generation, or the power plants, transmission, and distribution. Generation comprises the bulk of the price of electricity, followed by distribution and transmission. When you look on your electric bills, you will see that roughly half of the money you pay goes towards supply, which means generation, and the other half goes to paying for getting the electricity from the generator to your house, or transmission and distribution. In the generation of electricity, not all power plants are created equal, because supply must meet demand instantaneously, and some power plants are better at doing this than others. There are three main types of power plants: baseload, peaking, and intermediate. Baseload plants produce electricity at a constant rate, run continuously, and are often slow ramping, meaning it takes a long time for them to warm up when shut down completely. Peaking plants, also called peakers, have to meet electricity requirements during periods of greatest load on the system. Therefore, they need to be fast ramping, and they are often the most expensive. And intermediate plants are between baseload and peak in order to transition from one to the other. Therefore, they are usually more expensive than baseload, but not as expensive as peakers. During week 5, you examined the electricity profiles of the United States, the world, the state of Maine, and other regions. The results of your exploration should have revealed that electricity for the United States and the world comes mainly from the fossil fuels coal and natural gas, with a large proportion also coming from nuclear and hydro. Coal contributes the most to both electricity profiles, and natural gas contributes the second most. Maine's electricity profile is very different from that of the United States and the world. Although the state of Maine generates 35% of its electricity from natural gas-fired power plants, most of the electricity actually comes from renewables, biomass, and hydro. These profiles are important because when you are considering adopting new technology that shifts use from transportation or heating to electricity, the impact of those choices depends on where the electricity is coming from. If most of the electricity is from coal, electricity may not be a cleaner option compared to the original transportation or heating option. But in Maine, where most electricity comes from renewables, shifting transportation and heating to electricity does have significant environmental benefit. However, generation and consumption profiles can be different for the same region. The graph on the left shows the major sources of electricity generation in Maine, and the graph on the right shows the major sources of electricity consumption. These profiles differ slightly because some electricity is imported and exported from and to New England and Canada. Throughout the readings and videos, you became aware of some of the advantages and disadvantages of the current U.S. electricity system. Here are some that you may or may not have discovered. Advantages. The current system is reliable. Supply meets demand instantaneously every moment of the day. There is no thinking required on the part of the consumers. All you have to do is flip a switch and boom, you have power, like magic. And you don't even have to understand it. Also, it's efficient. Power plants, transformers, etc. have become more and more efficient over the last century. It is also inexpensive. Contrary to popular opinion, electricity in the United States is cheap compared to the rest of the world. In fact, the Energy Information Administration states that our electricity system is one of the most advanced, reliable, and well-maintained electricity generation, transmission, and distribution systems in the world. We might complain a lot when things go wrong, but in the scheme of the rest of the world, things do not go wrong all that often. Also, most consumers do not experience minute-by-minute fluctuating prices. As residential customers, we pay a flat price for electricity that might vary every year or so, but not by much, when in reality electricity prices actually vary minute by minute, sometimes by up to 1,000%. We don't have to experience those price shocks, except when they lead to outages. Disadvantages. Much of the current electricity system is based on very old, aging infrastructure and technology that badly needs upgrades, especially the transmission and distribution networks. But because of the way it is managed, it's difficult to figure out who should pay for or be responsible for maintaining these upgrades, so they don't get done. Also, many generators are old, inefficient, and dirty, especially the old coal power plants. See the next slide. But because they have been paid off for decades, and therefore operate very cheaply, we keep them running. The grid is very complex to manage, with different sections of the grid on different AC frequencies, different regulations in each state, etc. Therefore, it is difficult to make regulatory changes with so many entities in charge. And because most consumers are unaware of fluctuating prices, Demand concentrates during certain hours of the day or seasons of the year, leading to congestion during high demand periods, which can lead to outages or price spikes on the wholesale market. And there are many negative environmental and public health effects associated with current generation. This is one of the primary reasons we are seeking a more sustainable energy future. And there are currently no good ways of storing electricity in large quantities, meaning that we have to run baseload generators all the time, and it's difficult to incorporate intermittent renewables into the system. As mentioned in the previous slide, many of our baseload generators are very old and less efficient than new state-of-the-art power plants. This graph shows the generation capacity, i.e. the power plants, that are currently operating in the United States as of 2010 by size in gigawatts, by initial year of operation, and by fuel type. Coal power plants make up the largest portion of our electricity generation capacity, and most of the plants that are currently supplying the important baseload generation went into service 30 to 40 years ago or more, and are not as technologically efficient or clean as new coal power plants built today. This graph also shows that the recent trend has been to build more natural gas and wind power plants to meet growing demand rather than new coal power plants. The last question you explored was which sustainability indicators should we use for electricity? Now that you know what electricity is, how it works, and some of the advantages and disadvantages of the current system, you should have some idea as how we can compare different options based on whether they will offer an improvement to the current system or not. Here are some of the indicators you may have come up with, broken down by the 4 main categories of sustainability discussed in Unit 1. Remember, for a balanced approach to measuring sustainability, we want to choose at least one indicator from each category. Under economic sustainability, we might choose to consider the cost of producing the electricity, the cost of delivering the electricity, and whether the price changes quickly over time or remains stable. Under environmental sustainability indicators, greenhouse gas emissions, criteria air pollutant emissions, including sulfur and nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and others, land use, water pollution, and hazardous substances are all important. Efficiency, capacity factor, infrastructure needs, and whether a generator can provide baseload electricity are all important technical sustainability indicators. Capacity factor is a ratio of the energy the power plant generates over the course of a year to the amount it could potentially generate if it could operate all the time. We will discuss this more later in the unit. Some social sustainability indicators include health and safety effects, requirements for lifestyle changes, and others such as aesthetic impacts and jobs. There are, of course, other concerns, but remember that sustainability indicators must be quantitative and measurable. So I have tried to include indicators here that fit that requirement. We will discuss later in the unit how to quantify and measure these indicators for different electricity options. Now that you have a strong basis for understanding what electricity is, how it works, and how to assess electricity sustainability, we will apply that knowledge to evaluating conventional electricity options in Week 6.